Welcome back to Access Minnesota. We're talking to John Link Stein, Assistant Commissioner for the Minnesota Department of Health. John, welcome to Access Minnesota.
Thank you.
Following up on some of the questions that we had for Chris earlier, we're talking about the H1N1 vaccine, which we know is not available at the present time. Any idea when it will arrive? We're hearing perhaps sometime in mid-October.
What we've heard from the federal government who purchased all the vaccine is that it'll begin to arrive here in mid-October. It's sort of a slow start because of the production schedule that the manufacturers are on, but that it will then ramp up rapidly as we move into later October, November, and into December.
Are we sure there'll be enough eventually for everyone who needs a shot?
What we're told is that we will have an ample supply of vaccine for anyone who wants to be vaccinated.
Let's talk a little bit about some safety concerns. We know that there are some people who are very concerned about the safety of immunizations in general. Let's talk specifically, though, about the H1N1 vaccine. This vaccine has been tested. Are we confident that this is a safe vaccine?
We're absolutely confident that it is. This vaccine was produced in the same way that all the seasonal vaccines are produced, by the same manufacturers, using the same processes and methods. So it also has gone through clinical trials to look at safety concerns as well as the proper dose amounts and so forth. And that is, we have complete confidence in this vaccine.
And about the effectiveness, good confidence in that as well?
Absolutely. There have been clinical trials to look at that question, how effective is the vaccine. As you may have heard now, you'll not need 2 shots. Once earlier this year, we were considering the possibility that you might need 2 shots, one to kind of start your immunity, the second to boost your immunity. That's actually been found to be unnecessary for people over 10 years old. You'll be able to have just 1 dose and be effective.
But we should clarify, because earlier we did talk about 2 shots. You still do need 1, though, a separate shot for the seasonal flu and then for H1N1. But the concern was at some time we thought you might need 2 shots to be fully protected from H1N1.
That's correct. We thought at one point you were going to actually be told to get 3 shots, your seasonal flu vaccine, and then your initial boost of H1N1 vaccine, and then a booster after that. So now we're looking at, for the majority of the people for everyone over age 10, you're going to only need the seasonal flu vaccine and then your H1N1 vaccine.
And we talked earlier with Chris that there appears to be a tendency of this disease to target younger people this time around, which has not been the case in past years' flus. If we talk about young people, it would seem to me that the spread could be very, very rapid, because young people are in school, they're often in group living situations. What type of monitoring are you doing specifically for elementary, secondary schools and colleges and universities? Because this is where we're hearing most of the disease spreading right now in areas connected to schools. How are you monitoring that?
Well, we do have a school-based reporting system. Schools voluntarily report absenteeism to us. During a normal flu season, we have sort of a doubling of illness kind of a reporting. We've actually gotten much more sensitive with this H1N1 virus, and we're having schools report whenever there are 5% or more of their total population out with illness, or 3 or more kids in an elementary school classroom are out. And we get that information reported to us on a regular basis by schools around the state. There's about 3,000 public schools in Minnesota, and we're hearing right now, as of early October, about 135 schools reporting that level of illness and activity.
Now, is there a point where the schools might actually close if the disease impacts a good portion of their students and staff?
This year, the strategy that we're working with schools, and this is what the CDC is recommending, what we're also recommending, and Minnesota Department of Ed recommends, schools should remain open. Kids who are sick should be staying at home. If the school does get to a level where it's no longer practical to function as a school, either because there are so few kids in a classroom, or your faculty or your staff are unable to fulfill their required functions, then school closings would be more of a localized decision based on that illness. If the illness becomes more severe, then you might see that situation where school closings would be another strategy that we'd pull out and use. But for the current level of illness that we're seeing, we're really anticipating that schools will continue to function through the illness.
And John, it's worth repeating, what are the steps that people should immediately take to prevent catching influenza, and what should they do once they believe they have the disease to prevent spreading it to others?
Well, the primary thing to prevent getting the illness is to be very aware of your own health status and cover your cough, cover your sneezes and your coughs into your sleeve if you don't have a Kleenex, and also then use good hand washing techniques. If you do become ill, you should stay at home. And stay at home means stay at home. I want to emphasize the word stay. Especially for kids, they think, well, I don't have to go to school. That means I can go to the soccer game. That means I can go over to the restaurant or whatever, to the mall. We really want people who are ill to stay at home until they fully recover. And the advice we've given for schools is 24 hours after your fever symptoms resolve without any medication, without any fever-reducing medication. And as Chris pointed out earlier, that many times will be 5 to 7 days.
And that is a good point to reiterate, because I think a lot of people tend to believe that, once the symptoms begin to wane a little bit, oh, I'm not as contagious as I used to be. I can go back to work, I can go back to school. But you're saying 24 hours after you pretty much feel free of the symptoms and your temperature is normal.
That's correct. And every year people tough it out. We're Minnesotans. We're not gonna be beat down by this illness. Well, this is the year that we're actually encouraging people to be thoughtful about how we transmit the illness to each other and really protect each other by being vigilant and staying away from others when you're ill. That's one of our first lines of defense.
Now, we mentioned earlier in the interview, I believe Chris went over it, the importance of hand washing, and we've heard more and more about that over the last several years, about how that can stop the spread of so many diseases. And let's talk about hand washing. Should it be thorough? I mean, sometimes we'll just kind of run our hands under the water and toss a little soap onto it, and that's it. But I've heard, maybe you should spend a good 30 seconds or more vigorously rubbing your hands. And we know now there's a lot of antibacterials available too to use. Do you advise, a fairly concentrated hand washing process and perhaps a use of an antibacterial?
First of all, the hand washing regimen we recommend is with soap and water. Regular old soap and water and paper towels are the best way to wash your hands. 20 seconds is what we recommend. That means getting your hands wet, using soap, really focusing on the nooks and crannies in your hands, which you don't tend to think that much about. Those are places where germs can harbor, so your fingernails, the heels of your hands. 20 seconds is about twice through the song Happy Birthday or Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. So if you need some reminder, you can use that in your own head. If you don't have soap and water available, first of all, if your hands are dirt-free, in other words, you don't have organic matter all over them from being out working in the yard, then antibacterial or alcohol-based rub hand sanitizer is a good alternative. But our primary method would be good old soap and water.
And let's talk about the worst case scenario for a moment. We know that back during the polio outbreak, the Minnesota State Fair actually was canceled. Is there a scenario where public gatherings would be potentially suspended? Perhaps I'm thinking of religious ceremonies, consumption of the cup or the handshake, the greeting.
Sure.
Is there a point where we would say these are bad ideas and that we should stay home and stay away from public gatherings?
At this point, we're with the level of the illness that we're seeing, we're not recommending closing of any of those public gatherings or the more extreme interventions. If things become more severe, though, yes, the state does have laws and processes in place to address those questions of public gatherings. If there were a more severe presentation of the illness, then some cancellations might be prudent, but it would have to be a much different situation than we're currently in. The governor does have authority under the current law to declare a public health emergency, and that would be in place before we would see the kinds of public event closures. The other thing you asked about is just sort of religious ceremonies and other community-based events. We do have guidance on our website that assists those communities in making decisions about things like the sharing of greetings of peace, the common cup, part of our rituals in our religious ceremonies. Those are things that we're giving advice to those communities now. We're not suggesting that they be regulated or canceled, but that they want to think carefully about how they conduct them.
And we should mention the website. It's a great resource for people looking for information. It's mdhflu.com. John Linkstein, Assistant Commissioner for the Minnesota Department of Health, thanks so much for joining us on Access Minnesota.
You're welcome.
That's all for this month on Access Minnesota. We'll join you again next month. Thanks for watching.
Access Minnesota. Issues that matter to you. Join us again next week as we bring you the newsmakers and stories that shape our everyday lives.